Welcome back to Air Quality Matters and One Take. One Take, my take on a paper or report on air quality, ventilation and the built environment. One take in that it's well done in one take and tries to summarise for you a scientific perspective on something interesting in, well, usually 10 minutes or less, because who has the time to read all these amazing documents, right? This week, I'm looking at a short communication, a perspective piece in the Journal of Indoor Environments from late 2024. It's titled Towards Equitable and Sustainable Indoor Air Quality Guidelines, a perspective on mandating indoor air quality for public buildings. It's by a whole host of well-known names in our field, and it's a really interesting paper. It's not presenting brand new lab research, but rather it's a direct and very thoughtful response to a big headline-grabbing article that came out in the Journal of Science. So it's part of a global conversation happening right now at the highest levels, and it's a conversation about a simple question with an incredibly complex answer. Should we mandate indoor air quality standards? And if we do, how on earth do we do it right? This is a subject close to my heart and something I'm involved in all over the place. So to get the context, you have to know a little bit about the paper it's responding to. Early in 2024, a group led by Lydia Morawska published a piece in Science that made a powerful argument. They said, look, after everything that we've learned from COVID-19, it's time we get serious. We need mandatory, legally enforceable indoor air quality standards for all public buildings. And to make it practical, they proposed focusing on just 4 key parameters: PM2.5, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and a minimum ventilation rate. The idea was to keep it simple, measurable, and focused on protecting public health. And on the surface, that sounds great, right? It's a clean, straightforward approach. It gives building operators, regulators, and the public a clear target to aim for. But the authors of this paper step into the conversation and essentially say, yes, but hold on a minute. It's not that simple, and we might be trying to reinvent the wheel that's already been designed many, many times over. And this, for me, is the real heart of their paper. Their central argument is that before we rush to create new, simplified global mandates, we need to acknowledge, share, and learn from the vast body of regulations and guidelines that already exist all around the world. They point to a resource that they've been involved in creating, the International Society of Indoor Air Quality, IAQ, or Indoor Environmental Quality Guidelines database. This isn't some small list, it's a massive open source database from data from over 40 countries containing over 840 different limit values for indoor air quality. About a third of these are actual government regulations, the kind with legal teeth, and the rest are official guidelines. So the first big point is, we are not starting from a blank page here, far from it. And this is where their critique of the 4-parameter approach gets interesting. They argue that while those 4 are important, focusing only on them risks ignoring other critical pollutants that we already know are harmful and, crucially, that many countries already regulate. They point to things like formaldehyde and radon. These aren't minor players. They are significant health hazards, and many national standards already have limits for them. So why, they ask, would you create a new mandatory framework and leave them out? It kind of feels like taking a step backwards in a kind of way. Then they dig into the specific limits proposed in that Science article. Take PM2.5. The proposal suggests a 1-hour limit, which sounds protective. But the authors point out that complying with a short-term limit like that can be incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible, in urban areas where the outdoor air quality is already poor. If the air coming into the building is already exceeding the limit, it places a huge and perhaps unfair burden on building developers and owners to filter it to an extremely high degree. Their point is that we need to be realistic and connect indoor standards to outdoor context. But the even bigger issue they raise is around the proposed ventilation rate. The rate suggested in the science paper was about 14 litres per second per person. Now, they point out this is roughly double what many countries currently require in their standards for schools and public spaces. And you can immediately see the problem here, can't you? Energy. Doubling ventilation rates has implications for sustainability. And the protective nature of increasing air change rates is a law of diminishing returns. It means conditioning, heating, or cooling twice as much air, which drives up energy consumption and, by extension, carbon emissions. They argue that this could make the standard completely unachievable, especially in less developed countries where buildings often rely on natural ventilation. Just opening a window. Mandating such a high mechanical ventilation rate could compromise thermal comfort and create enormous economic barriers. This is where the equitable and sustainable part of their title really comes into play, I suppose. A standard that only works for the new high-tech buildings, as I often talk in the podcast about, isn't really a global solution. So if a simple one-size-fits-all mandate isn't the answer, what is? Well, the paper proposes a much more nuanced path forward. They suggest that instead of creating a new set of rules from scratch, the more beneficial and successful approach is for countries to adopt internationally agreed upon guidelines like those from the WHO and then modify and adapt them to suit their own regional needs. They have to consider their local climate, their typical building stock, their economic realities, and their cultural practices. This adopt and adapt model, I think, is probably a more pragmatic approach. In fact, I even talked about this on social media this week, asking the question, is income actually the single biggest barrier to improved air quality, particularly in developing nations? It leverages the global scientific consensus where it exists, but allows for a flexibility needed to create policies that are actually workable on the ground. And they argue that the scientific community has a role to play here by using tools like that indoor environmental quality database to help policymakers see what others are doing, to learn from existing frameworks, and to establish knowledge-based guidelines that are both equitable and sustainable. So to wrap it all up, the main takeaway from this paper isn't that mandatory indoor air quality standards are a bad idea. On the contrary, the authors seem to agree with the urgency, but they are cautioning us against the allure of a simple silver bullet solution. They remind us that the world is a complex place and good policy has to reflect that complexity. The real path forward, they argue, lies in collaboration, in building upon decades of work that has already been done and in creating frameworks that are flexible enough to be adapted to local realities. It's a call for a more thoughtful, more humble approach to a global problem. It's a reminder that sometimes the best way to move forward is to take a careful look at where we already are. And in the quest for better indoor air, maybe the perfect can't be the enemy of the good, especially when the good has to work for everyone, everywhere. Hope you enjoyed that episode of One Take. These podcasts aren't possible without our partners, so thanks a million to Safe Traces and Imbiot for their support. See you next week.